My name is Russell Bennett. I am 67 years old, and for most of my life, I have been the kind of man who solves problems without making a scene. I fixed things, paid what was owed, and stayed quiet more often than I should have, because I truly believed family took care of its own. That belief was why I trusted my oldest son with the most important responsibility I had ever handed to anyone, helping manage the care of my wife of 41 years. Evelyn had Alzheimer's disease, and on her good days, she still recognized my voice before she recognized my face. I gave Marcus access to the checkbook and the paperwork because I told myself, he is my son. He will do right by his mother. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, I learned that Evelyn had been moved out of the care center I trusted 3 weeks earlier, and no one had told me. We bought the house in 1989. 3 bedrooms, a cracked driveway, and a backyard that Evelyn turned into a garden before we'd even finished unpacking. She planted tomatoes every May. She knew every neighbor's birthday by heart. She was the kind of woman who made a place feel like home without trying. For 32 years, she taught 2nd grade at Clearview Elementary. She retired at 61 not because she was tired of the kids, she never was, but because her knees started failing her. That was fine. She had her garden, her afternoon walks, her stack of library books. Then things started slipping. Small things at first. She'd forget where she put the car keys. She'd blank on the name of a student she'd taught for a full year. I told myself it was normal. Told myself everyone forgets things as they get older. Then, one morning I found her standing in front of the stove, her hand on the burner knob turning it back and forth without lighting it. She wasn't confused exactly. She just couldn't remember which direction was on. I took her to Dr. Samuel Ortega 2 weeks later. The word he used was Alzheimer's. Stage 2. I'm not going to pretend that conversation didn't break something in me, but I'm also not going to pretend I handled it perfectly. I tried to keep her home for 4 months after the diagnosis. I cooked, I scheduled her medications, I sat with her through the nights when she didn't know what year it was. I'm not a nurse. I'm her husband. And there came a point when I knew, honestly knew, that she needed more than I could give her alone. That's when we moved Evelyn into Willowbrook Care Center, and that's when I asked Marcus to help. Marcus is my oldest, 41 years old, works as a district manager for a regional retail chain out of Nashville. He'd always been responsible, or at least, he'd always looked responsible, which I now understand is not the same thing. 2 years ago, I gave him my F-150. Not as a loan, as a gift. He'd been driving a beat-up Civic for years, and I figured a man his age ought to have something decent under him. He thanked me the way you thank someone for a birthday card. Quick, sincere enough, and then forgotten. When I told him about the plan for Evelyn, he showed up to the care facility on moving day in that truck. Helped carry boxes, shook hands with the staff director. He knew exactly what to say. We'll make sure she's comfortable, Dad. Don't worry. That's the thing about Marcus. He always knew the right words. He had this way of speaking that made you feel like everything was under control, his control, and that you should be grateful for it. He called me every Sunday after that. Short updates. Mom's doing well. Everything's fine. He never mentioned what Evelyn had eaten, whether she'd had a good day or a hard one, whether she'd asked about the tomatoes. Just fine. Everything fine. I didn't push. He was busy. He had a wife, a job, a life I didn't want to interrupt more than necessary. What I didn't notice at the time, what I should have noticed, was that a man who truly cared would have found something specific to say. You don't just say fine about someone you love. You say she laughed today, or she remembered the name of our old cat. You say something real. Marcus never did. In February, my cardiologist found a partial blockage. Nothing immediately life-threatening, he said, but serious enough to schedule a stent procedure within the week. Routine, he called it. I've never liked that word applied to someone cutting near your heart. My daughter Natalie flew in from Austin. She's 36, works in healthcare administration, which meant she understood every form they handed me and every term the doctors used. She stayed a week, made sure I ate, sat with me through the slow afternoons when the only thing to do was rest. Before she left, she asked, "Do you want me to stay longer, Dad?" I told her no. She had a life, a job she cared about. I wasn't going to pull her out of it because of a stent and some recovery time. That's a decision I've thought about since. The week after surgery, Marcus came by the house. We sat at the kitchen table, and I signed a durable financial power of attorney in his name. Access to the joint checking account I used to pay Willowbrook's monthly fee and cover Evelyn's incidentals. $5,800 a month. I had it set up on a transfer schedule. Before I handed him the paperwork, I said, "This money is for your mother's care. That's it." Marcus nodded. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. "I know, Dad. Trust me. I did. That was the mistake." One other thing worth mentioning, something that will matter later. I keep a separate savings account. Not a joint account. Not one tied to any document Marcus ever touched. Just mine, set up years ago for a single purpose. To make sure Evelyn would be provided for if I went before her. Marcus didn't know it existed. He still doesn't. The first 4 weeks were quiet. I called Willowbrook twice from the house, and the nurses confirmed Evelyn was settling in. She'd eaten well, slept reasonably, recognized a few of the staff by their voices. One morning, she apparently asked a nurse whether the garden needed watering yet. That was Evelyn. Even when the fog came in, some part of her was still tending something. Marcus's text arrived like clockwork. Every few days, short and the same. "Mom's good, all fine." I read them from the couch where I was supposed to be resting, and I didn't question them. Then, sometime in the 4th week, I called Evelyn's room directly. She picked up. Her voice was lighter than I expected, almost cheerful. "Russell," she said. "When are you coming?" "Soon, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Fine. It's a different bed, though. The pillow's not the same." "A different bed." I figured they'd moved her within Willowbrook. They sometimes rotate rooms when a resident needs a different wing or quieter surroundings. When I mentioned it to Marcus the next day, he texted back within 20 minutes. The words "different bed" stayed with me, but I assumed Willowbrook had moved Evelyn to another room or wing. Facilities sometimes make those changes when a resident needs quieter surroundings. When I mentioned it to Marcus the next day, he replied within 20 minutes. He said she had been moved to a quieter section with less stimulation, that a doctor had suggested it, and that the change was better for her stage of the disease. I read the message twice, set down my phone, and returned to my book. I did not yet understand that a quieter section and a different zip code were two very different things. Later that month, I reviewed the joint account online. The first payment to Willowbrook had gone through correctly, $5,800. Beneath it was a smaller charge for $340 labeled supplies and miscellaneous. I did not think much of it. Care brings unexpected expenses, and I assumed there was a reasonable explanation. Still, I noticed the entry, the way you notice a splinter before it begins to hurt. 2 weeks later, Natalie called on a Thursday afternoon. I heard concern in her voice before she reached the point. She told me she had tried calling Evelyn's room at Willowbrook, but the number had been disconnected. She had called the front desk as well. Someone transferred her, and the line simply kept ringing. I told her I would look into it, ended the call, and contacted Willowbrook myself. A woman named Monica answered. I identified myself as Evelyn Bennett's husband and asked to check on my wife. After a pause, Monica said, "Mr. Bennett, our records show that Mrs. Bennett was discharged about 3 weeks ago." The room seemed to lose its sound. "Discharged?" I repeated. "To where?" Monica apologized and explained that a release of information form was on file. Because Evelyn could no longer direct her own care, the designated contact controlled what the facility was allowed to disclose, and that contact was Marcus Bennett. Habit took over, so I thanked her before hanging up. Then I sat in the kitchen, trying to understand how my wife could have been moved without anyone believing her husband needed to know. The microwave clock blinked the wrong time because I had never reset it after a power outage 2 months earlier. Little things you postpone. Little things you allow to remain wrong. I called Marcus 3 times. The first 2 calls went to voicemail. On the third, I left one message. "Call me back today." He did not. That night, I slept perhaps 2 hours. It was not only fear keeping me awake. Somewhere inside, I already knew I was going to find something I did not want to see. At 7 the next morning, I called Howard Pierce, my friend since our children had played Little League together. Retired accountant, sharp as he ever was. I told him what I knew, and he told me he'd make some calls. By 9:00, he had an address, Sunrise Valley Extended Care. 38 miles south off a county road I'd never had reason to take. My cardiologist had cleared me to drive the week before. Nothing strenuous, he said, but normal day-to-day was fine. I drove out there that same morning. The building was single-story, brick, set back from the road behind a parking lot made entirely of cracked asphalt. No garden, no trees to speak of, a small American flag by the entrance that needed replacing. Inside, the hallway smelled of industrial cleaner and something underneath it I didn't want to name. A television played in a common room to my left. I found the nurse's station and gave them Evelyn's name. They led me to a shared room near the back. Evelyn was sitting in a chair by the window. Not the window that looked out at anything, just a window that faced the parking lot. She was in a hospital gown rather than her own clothes. Her hair had been pinned back unevenly. She looked smaller. She looked up when I came in. Her eyes moved across my face the way they do now, searching, working to place me, and then something settled. "Russell," she said. "Hey, sweetheart. It's cold in here." She said it simply, the way you'd mention weather. I sat down next to her and took her hand. It felt lighter than I remembered. Along the inside of Evelyn's wrist was a long red mark. I had spent enough years working with tools and equipment to recognize pressure when I saw it. The mark looked more like the result of a restraint than a fall. I thought about the woman who had filled our backyard with tomatoes and always chosen the chair beside the best window. I did not confront anyone in that moment. Evelyn was confused. I was still recovering, and anger without facts would not help her. I sat beside her, held her hand, and started making plans. On the drive home, I called Marcus for the 4th time. This time, he answered. His voice was calm and casual, as though we had spoken the day before. I kept my eyes on the road and asked him to explain why his mother was at Sunrise Valley instead of Willowbrook. He paused for about 3 seconds, the kind of pause a person takes while deciding which version of the truth to offer. Then he said, "Doctor, Samuel Ortega had recommended a quieter environment with less stimulation and claimed he had researched the facility carefully." I asked when the move had happened. "About 3 weeks ago," he said. He insisted he had kept it from me only because he did not want to add stress while I was recovering. I let that answer sit before asking, "You moved my wife to a different facility and did not tell me?" Marcus started to interrupt, but I told him I was not raising my voice. I was asking a question. Marcus said he had made the best decision he could with the information available and reminded me that I had trusted him to handle things. "I trusted you to manage the finances," I said. "I did not authorize you to make medical decisions without my knowledge." He argued that the transfer was logistical, not medical. I did not debate the label. Instead, I asked him to come to the house that weekend so we could speak face to face. He agreed. But by then his tone had become careful and cooperative, the kind of tone that tells you someone is recalculating. After we hung up, I called Dr. Ortega's office. I asked his nurse whether the doctor had recommended transferring Evelyn to another care facility. She placed me on hold for 2 minutes. When she returned, she said, "Mr. Bennett, we have no record of any such recommendation." I wrote down the date and time of the call. The next morning, Howard came over with a legal pad and the reading glasses he was always pushing higher on his nose. I had printed the previous 8 weeks of statements from the joint account, and we spread them across the kitchen table to examine every transaction. The first month showed the expected payment to Willowbrook, $5,800. Then, beginning about 5 weeks later, the Willowbrook payments stopped. In their place were payments of $2,600 to Sunrise Valley. The second month was the same. That left a difference of $3,200 every month. Beneath the facility charges, the pattern became worse. A $1,200 cash withdrawal labeled supplies, $850 paid to a transportation company with no matching invoice I could find, and $600 described as a medication copay. Howard set down his pen and asked whether Evelyn was on Medicaid at Sunrise Valley. I said she appeared to be. He pointed out that residents at that level should not have had the kind of copay shown on the statement. I already knew. I had checked the night before because the number did not make sense. Howard removed his glasses and folded them. He told me that redirecting money, designated for care and recording expenses that did not correspond to actual services, could be treated as misappropriation. An attorney would use that word. I told him I understood. When he asked whether I wanted a referral, I said not yet. I wanted to hear what Marcus would say on Saturday before taking the next step. Then I picked up the statement and looked again at the Sunrise Valley figure. $3,200 a month. $3,200 had been diverted from Evelyn's care month after month, while I sat at home recovering from surgery and trusting my son. I told Howard I would not move quickly until every number was correct. He nodded and said, "The numbers are correct, Russell. You already have them." Marcus arrived Saturday afternoon in the F-150. I recognized the low sound of the engine before I saw the truck pull into the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched him get out. The truck had been washed recently, and the chrome along the side was clean. I met him at the door, led him to the kitchen, and poured coffee without asking whether he wanted any. The statements remained on the counter behind me, because I wanted to hear his explanation before showing him exactly what I knew. "Tell me about Sunrise Valley," I said. Marcus leaned back and described it as a good, quieter facility where Evelyn was doing fine. He claimed it had less chaos and less noise and was better suited to her stage of the disease. I asked who had made that determination. He mentioned the intake coordinator and again suggested that Dr. Ortega's team had been recommending lower stimulation. "I called Dr. Ortega's office yesterday," I said. "They have no record of recommending a transfer." His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before his expression relaxed again. Maybe it was a phone conversation, something informal. Maybe. I took a sip of coffee. "Can you send me the receipts for the expenses you've been running through the account? The transport charges, the supplies, the medication copay?" "Sure, of course." He said it the way people say of course when they have no intention of following through. "I'd like them by Monday." He nodded. "Not a problem." He left 20 minutes later. I stood at the kitchen window and watched him back the F-150 out of the driveway. He didn't look back at the house. He never sent the receipts. Not Monday, not Tuesday, not ever. 2 weeks after I'd first found her there, I went back to see Evelyn on a Wednesday. I didn't tell Marcus. She was in the shared dining room when I arrived, one of those large fluorescent lit spaces with round tables and plastic chairs. She was sitting alone at a table near the window, though window is generous. It looked out onto a concrete utility area. The nurse on duty, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25, told me Evelyn had lost about 7 pounds since admission. She said it with a flat, bureaucratic tone, the way you read a number off a chart. I asked about the mark I'd seen on her wrist. The nurse paused. "Friction mark. Sometimes at night when residents are agitated, we use a soft restraint if there aren't enough staff on the floor to monitor closely." Soft restraint. Evelyn, the woman who used to wake up early to water the garden before it got too hot. I went to sit with her. She looked up and her face moved through that searching expression, the working through, the recognizing, and then she reached for my hand. Cold. She smiled, small and tired. "Have you seen our son lately?" I held her hand. "He's been busy, Evelyn. He never calls." "I know." She looked out the window at the concrete. "This place isn't like the other one." "No," I said. "It's not." She had asked about Marcus, the son who had put her here, who had not visited once since the transfer. Not a single time in 4 weeks. And she was the one wondering what he was up to. I didn't cry in front of her. I sat straight and held her hand until she dozed off in the chair. That was the moment I stopped trying to understand Marcus. I started making plans instead. I asked Howard to do a little more digging. He came back to me 2 days later with a legal pad full of notes in his tight accountant's handwriting. Public records, property filings, nothing he shouldn't have been looking at. Marcus and his wife Laura had bought an investment property in Hermitage, a neighborhood outside Nashville, in the spring of 2023. Purchase price, $340,000. Variable rate mortgage, low initial payments. The market in that area had since dropped. The property's current estimated value was roughly 18% below what they'd paid. They were underwater. There was also a HELOC, a home equity line, taken against their primary residence. $28,000 drawn down. Howard estimated total consumer debt in the range of $65 to $75,000. The monthly minimum payments alone would have been significant. You needed cash flow, Howard said. Reducing your wife's care costs by $3,200 a month gave him breathing room. He wasn't doing it to be cruel. He was doing it because he was drowning, and he thought he'd found a lifeboat. That doesn't make it acceptable. No, it doesn't. I looked out the window at the driveway for a moment. Can a durable financial POA be revoked? By you? Yes, anytime. You're the principal. As long as you're mentally competent, you can revoke it with a written document and a notary. And if I close the joint account at the same time? Howard looked at me steadily. Then he has no access to any funds connected to Evelyn's care. None. I nodded. I picked up the legal pad and read through the numbers once more. I had a meeting scheduled with Marcus for Friday. I planned to give him one more chance. One chance to tell me the truth on his own terms. He didn't take it. He came on Friday. Same driveway, same truck. This time I'd laid the bank statements flat on the kitchen table before he arrived. I waited until he sat down. Then I pushed the papers toward him. Walk me through these numbers, I said. He looked at the statements. His eyes moved across them slowly, and something in his posture shifted. What I saw in Marcus's face was not guilt so much as calculation. Dad, I was trying to manage costs, he said. I kept my voice level. Where did the $3,200 a month go? He looked at the statements, then at me, and his posture changed. The careful expression hardened. He reminded me that while I had been recovering, he had handled the phone calls, paperwork, logistics, and transfer. He said I did not appreciate how much work that had required. I appreciate the work, I told him. Now explain the money. His jaw set. He said he had made a judgment call, that Sunrise Valley was adequate and that Evelyn was safe there. He claimed he had found a way to reduce the monthly burden and had used the savings appropriately. Appropriately? I repeated. Marcus said yes. I asked again where the $3,200 had gone. Then he looked directly into my eyes and said, Dad, Mom does not know the difference anymore. The kitchen became completely still. I could hear the refrigerator humming and the clock ticking on the wall. I let the sentence sit for several seconds because I wanted to be certain I understood what he meant. He was not saying the facilities were equal. He was saying that because Evelyn could no longer reliably remember the better room, the familiar staff, or the garden outside her window, those things no longer mattered enough to protect. Her inability to explain what she had lost had become his justification for taking it away. I stood. She is your mother, Marcus, I said. She is not a line item. Then I opened the back door. He left without another word. Afterward, I got into my car and drove for 20 minutes before realizing I had no destination. I pulled into the parking lot of a hardware store I had used for 30 years and sat with the engine off. The sentence kept repeating in my mind. She does not know the difference anymore. I had worked 4 decades in the electrical trade, built a company from nothing, sold it before retirement, and saved the proceeds carefully. I had given Marcus a truck because I wanted to help him. I had trusted him with his mother's care because I believed he was the man I had raised. I had trusted him with his mother's care because I believed he was the man I thought I'd raised. I sat in that parking lot for maybe 15 minutes, then I drove home. That evening I called Natalie. She answered on the second ring, and I told her everything. From the transfer to the statements to what Marcus had said at that table, she listened without interrupting. She gets that from her mother, that particular quality of silence. When I finished, she said, "What do you need me to do, Dad?" "Nothing yet. I just needed someone to know the truth before I did anything about it." "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." I thought about it. "I'm sad, but I'm fine." We talked for a few more minutes, and then I told her I'd keep her posted and let her go. I made a pot of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Marcus had just looked me in the eye and told me his mother didn't know the difference, and I opened my laptop. I typed Howard Pierce's number into the search bar. Then I looked up the direct line for my branch at First Community Bank. I wasn't going to rush, but I was done waiting. Howard met me at his kitchen table on Saturday morning. His wife brought coffee and then left us to it. He had the name of an elder law attorney he'd used for his own parents' estate, a woman named Judith Harper. Solo practice, been in Murfreesboro for over 20 years. We drove over together that afternoon. Judith was direct in the way that experienced attorneys tend to be. No softening, no hedging. She read the bank statements I'd brought, made a few notes, and looked up at me. "You can revoke the POA today," she said. "As the principal, as long as you're mentally competent, and clearly you are, you have the right to revoke at any time with a written notarized document. We can prepare that this afternoon. And the joint account? You can close that independently. Call the bank Monday morning. Cite your right as co-owner." I told her I wasn't looking to pursue legal action against Marcus, not unless it became necessary. What I wanted was simple. Evelyn back at Willowbrook, the money back in my control, and no further access for Marcus to anything connected to her care. "That's achievable," Judith said, "and it's the right sequence." She walked me through it step by step. Revoke the POA, close the account, contact Willowbrook about readmission, then notify Sunrise Valley of the transfer date. "What about the funds he misappropriated?" Howard asked. Judith looked at me. "That's a civil matter. You can pursue it later if you choose. But first things first. I signed the POA revocation before I left her office. On the way home, I told Howard, Monday morning, first call goes to the bank. He nodded. You sleeping tonight? Probably not, I said, but I'm clear. Laura called Sunday evening. She's 39, quiet in person, the kind of woman who measures her words carefully before she spends them. I've always liked her for that. She and Marcus have been married 11 years. Russell. She used my first name, which she only does when it's serious. Marcus told me you're upset with him. I am. A pause. He said there were some disagreements about how he handled things with Evelyn. Laura, it goes beyond a disagreement. I've seen the bank statements. I know what he moved, and I know why he moved her. Another pause. Longer this time. I didn't know he'd changed her facility, she said. Her voice was careful, but I could hear something in it. Not surprise exactly, but the sound of a piece fitting into a puzzle she'd already been working. He told me the doctor recommended it. The doctor didn't recommend anything. I checked. She was quiet for several seconds. Do you know about the Hermitage property? I asked. I know we're in over our heads with it. Her voice dropped. I didn't know he was using your money to cover it. I believe her. Laura isn't a liar. She's been living inside a problem she didn't fully know the shape of. Laura, I'm not doing this to blow up your family, but I can't leave things the way they are. I know. Her voice was thin. I understand, Russell. I really do. We said goodnight. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while after we hung up. There are moments in something like this when you feel the weight of it spreading. Not just to the person who did wrong, but outward to everyone standing near them. Laura didn't deserve this, but I couldn't fix that part. I could only fix what was mine to fix. Monday, I was up before 6:00. I'm not typically a pacing man, but I made coffee, sat down, stood up again, and went through the plan one more time in my head. Not because I was uncertain, because I'd spent 40 years fixing things right the first time, and I wasn't going to change that now. At 8:57, I called First Community Bank. Karen has managed my accounts there for 15 years. She knows my voice. I told her I needed to close the joint checking account, the one with Marcus's access, effective immediately, and that I needed his authorization removed from any linked accounts under my name. She walked me through the process. There were 2 forms to sign. She faxed them to me. I signed them at the kitchen table and faxed them back. Total time, 11 minutes. At 9:15, I called Judith Harper's office. Her assistant confirmed the POA revocation had been filed, and that certified mail notification to Marcus would go out that afternoon. At 9:40, Judith called me back. Everything was clean on the record. At 10:00, I called Willowbrook. The admissions coordinator said they had a private room available. I asked her to hold it. At 10:30, I called Sunrise Valley's administration and told them I was Evelyn Bennett's husband and legal decision maker, and that I would be arranging a transfer on Wednesday. By 11, I was back at the kitchen table with my 3rd cup of coffee. I had not raised my voice, sent an angry message, or tried to force Marcus into doing the right thing. I had made 4 telephone calls, signed the necessary forms, and restored the authority I should never have assumed would protect itself. That was all it took to undo the structure he had built. Sitting in the quiet, I realized it had taken only a little more than 2 hours to protect my wife, and nearly 40 years to understand that love did not require leaving every door unlocked. I did not slam any doors. I simply stopped unlocking them. He arrived at 2:00 in the afternoon, no call ahead. I heard the F-150 in the driveway and watched him get out from the kitchen window. His face was tight. He was walking fast. He knocked once and then opened the screen door without waiting. I stepped onto the front porch before he could come inside. We stood there in the afternoon sun, and I put my hands in my pockets. Dad. His voice was sharp at the edges. You closed the account. Marcus arrived at 2 that afternoon without calling first. I heard the F-150 in the driveway and saw him walking toward the house with his face tight and his pace quick. He knocked once, then opened the screen door without waiting. I stepped onto the porch before he could enter. Dad, he said, his voice sharp at the edges. You closed the account. The power of attorney. What is this? I told him I had revoked the power of attorney and closed the joint account. He said I could not simply do that. I can, and I did, I answered. Judith Harper filed the paperwork on Friday. The certified notice should have reached you this morning. He stared at me. His hands moved at his sides as though he could not decide whether to point or clench them. Then he said he had handled everything while I recovered the calls, the paperwork, the decisions, and that he had sacrificed his time. I kept my voice steady. You moved your mother without telling me. You used money designated for her care for other purposes. I gave you the weekend to return with an honest explanation, and you did not. Marcus insisted he had been saving us money. You were saving yourself money, I said. That is different. He held my gaze for a long moment, and then the defiance in his face gave way to something more desperate. He told me about the Hermitage property, the home equity line of credit, and the pressure he had been carrying. His voice broke twice. I listened until he finished, because explanation still mattered, even when it could not erase the choice. Marcus, I said, you should have come to me before any of this reached your mother's care. That was the moment to ask for help, and you did not take it. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and asked whether I was done with him. I am not done with you, I said, but I am done with you having control over your mother. He stood on the porch for another moment, then turned toward the truck. He sat in the driveway for several minutes before starting the engine. I expected him to leave quickly, as people sometimes do when they want the departure itself to make a statement, but he backed out slowly and drove away at a normal speed. I remained on the porch until the truck disappeared down the street. But he just drove away at normal speed down the street and then he was gone. I went inside and called Natalie. Short version of events. She asked if she needed to fly back. No, I said. It's handled. How are you doing? I've been better. I've also been worse. She laughed a little, which helped. After we hung up, I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled up a draft of what I needed to send to Judith. A note about the F-150. Marcus had been driving it for 2 years, but the title was still in my name. I'd never gotten around to transferring it, and we'd had no written agreement about ownership. A verbal understanding, nothing more. Legally, it was mine to request back. I asked Judith to send a formal letter. Then I went to bed at 9:30 and slept for 7 hours. It was the first real sleep I'd had in 10 days. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't happy. There was nothing satisfying about what had happened that afternoon on the porch. My son had looked me in the eye and told me his mother didn't know the difference. That's not something a father forgets. But I was done carrying the weight of a situation I'd let go on too long. Whatever came next, Marcus's debts, his marriage, his choices, that was his to carry. My job, the one I should have been doing all along, was to take care of Evelyn. That part I could still do. Marcus called his cousin Diane the same evening. Diane is 55, lives across town, and has the particular skill some people have of absorbing one side of a story and redistributing it at full volume before the other side has a chance to speak. She called me Tuesday morning. Russell, I just got off the phone with Marcus. He says you've cut him off completely. He says you're being... She paused, choosing her word. Reactive. Diane, when you want to see the bank statements, I'll show them to you. A short silence. That's all I need to say on the matter, I added. My door is open. She called me back Wednesday afternoon. She'd apparently talked to Howard. They've known each other for years and gotten a clearer picture. She didn't say much. Just, I'm sorry, Russell. I had the wrong end of it. One of Marcus's coworkers texted me out of the blue. He'd heard something through channels I didn't ask about. A cousin on Evelyn's side sent a card. I didn't run a campaign. I didn't call anyone. I just had the numbers, and the numbers had a way of traveling on their own. Laura called once more on Thursday. This time she asked me whether I would object to her speaking with an attorney, her own attorney. Not about me, about her marriage. That's entirely your decision, I told her, and I wish you well. Her voice was tired but steadier than it had been Sunday. She thanked me, and we said goodbye. I thought about Laura for a while after that call. She had married a man she believed she knew. She was finding out, the way most people find out, that knowing someone and trusting them are different things, and that sometimes the gap between those two things is where the damage lives. Wednesday morning, I arranged a medical transport van, the proper kind, with staff trained for memory care patients, and drove out to Sunrise Valley to accompany Evelyn. She was confused when they brought her to the front. New faces, a change in routine. She kept asking where they were taking her. I walked beside the wheelchair and held her hand. We're going back to the first place, I told her. The one with the garden outside the window. She thought about this. The one with the bird feeder? That's the one. She relaxed a little. When we arrived at Willowbrook, a nurse named Teresa, who had been one of Evelyn's favorites, was standing at the entrance. Evelyn looked at Teresa, and her face changed with the particular kind of recognition that comes when a person sees something safe. Teresa, she said. The nurse smiled and answered, Welcome back, Mrs. Bennett. Then took Evelyn's other hand. That afternoon, I paid the first month's fee from the separate savings account Marcus had never known existed. I had opened it years earlier to make sure Evelyn would be cared for if I died before her. Instead, it became the money that allowed me to correct what had happened while I was still here to protect her. Evelyn's room was a private single facing the courtyard. There was a small bird feeder on the other side of the glass. Someone on the staff had kept it filled. I stayed for 3 hours. We sat by the window and Evelyn drifted in and out, the way she does now. At one point, she looked at me very clearly and said, Russell, you came back. I never left, I said. She put her head back and looked out at the bird feeder. A cardinal landed on the edge of it, and she watched it for a long time without speaking. I sat there next to her and felt something loosen in my chest that had been knotted tight for weeks. Judith sent the formal letter to Marcus on Thursday, a notice of my intent to reclaim the vehicle, citing my status as the title holder of record, requesting the truck be returned within 10 days. He didn't respond to Judith's letter, not by email, not by phone. On day 1, Judith sent a second notice with the words legal proceedings in it. On day 13, I woke up at 6:30 and looked at the kitchen window. The F-150 was parked at the curb in front of the house. No note, no knock at the door. I walked out and checked the door handle. The keys were inside, laid on the driver's seat. The truck was clean. He'd washed it before returning it. I stood there in the early morning in my slippers and looked at it for a minute. There was a part of me that expected to feel something sharp, satisfaction or relief, or maybe grief. What I actually felt was more like fatigue. Not the kind that comes from a bad night. The kind that settles in when something that took too long is finally over. I picked up the keys, locked the truck, and went back inside. I made coffee. I thought about what to do with the truck. I decided there was no rush. It's still sitting in the driveway. I haven't sold it, haven't given it away. I'm not sure yet what I'll do with it. Some decisions don't need to be made quickly. Some things you can let sit on the curb until you know what they're worth. I wasn't happy that it had come to this. I was just relieved that the part requiring urgency was over, and that nothing left on the list required his cooperation to complete. 3 weeks after the porch conversation, Marcus sent an email. It was 6 sentences long. He said he hoped I was doing well. He said he understood I was angry. He said he'd been thinking a lot about things. He asked whether he was permitted to visit his mother. No apology, not in so many words, but he asked about Evelyn, which was more than he'd done in the 2 months she'd been at Sunrise Valley. I read the email 3 times. Then I called Judith and asked her a straightforward question. Did Marcus have any legal right to visit Evelyn? There's no restriction in place, she said. He can visit. You could request advance notice as a condition, but you can't prohibit contact. I sat with that for a while. I didn't want to prohibit it. Whatever Marcus had done, Evelyn still asked about him, sometimes in her way. She still called him our son. That wasn't something I could undo, and I was not sure I would want to, even if I could. I wrote back the same evening. Marcus, you can come to see your mother. I ask that you give me 24 hours notice before any visit. You are not to discuss financial matters, care decisions, or facility arrangements with staff or administration. In my reply, I told Marcus he could visit Evelyn, but I asked for 24 hours notice before any visit. I also made the boundary clear. He was not to discuss finances, care decisions, or facility arrangements with staff or administrators. Those conversations would come through me. I signed the message, Dad. He answered with one word. Okay. It was not an apology or a thank you. It was the smallest possible acknowledgement, but I told myself it was a beginning. Maybe it would never be enough, but it was a beginning. I closed the laptop and stood from the same kitchen table where so much of the damage had been uncovered. After 41 years of marriage and decades spent building a family, the most honest thing I could offer my son was a door I had not closed completely. I visit Evelyn every Tuesday and Friday now. I chose that schedule deliberately. I do not go every day because that pace would exhaust me, and I need to be fully present when I am with her. The drive takes 40 minutes each way. When something is blooming in our yard, I bring flowers. When nothing is, I bring coffee for myself and sit with whatever she wants to talk about. Alzheimer's has continued to progress. That was never going to change. Some Tuesdays, she knows exactly who I am, laughs at something I say, and squeezes my hand the way she has since 1982. Some Fridays, she is somewhere else entirely, living in a year I was not part of and speaking to people I cannot see. Both kinds of days matter. I show up for both. Natalie flew in for a long weekend in April. The 3 of us had lunch in the courtyard, Evelyn, Natalie, and me. And Evelyn told the same story about a camping trip we took in 1998, 3 times in a row. And each time, Natalie laughed like it was new. I don't know where she gets that patience, probably from her mother. Howard stopped by the house on a Tuesday evening not long after. We sat on the porch, and he asked, the way old friends do, whether I thought I'd made the right calls. I made the necessary calls, I said. He thought about that. Same thing, isn't it? Not always, but this time, yeah. We sat there until the light got low, and the neighbors down the street started their dinner. Neither of us needed to say much else. Some things get settled not with words, but with a particular quiet that comes after you've stopped fighting something you couldn't change and started protecting what you could. The truck keys are still on the kitchen counter. I moved them there from the driveway the morning Marcus left them, and I've picked them up a dozen times since, turning them over in my hand the way you do with something you're trying to decide the weight of. I haven't decided yet. Maybe I'll sell the truck. Maybe I'll keep it. It's just a truck. What I know now is that I spent 40 years believing that if you build something honestly, a marriage, a family, a reputation for doing things right, people will meet you in that same place. Most of the time, that is true. But people also become desperate. They get in over their heads and begin making calculations that would have horrified an earlier version of themselves. Because the change happens gradually, each step can feel defensible on its own. Marcus did not wake up one morning intending to betray his mother. He reached that point slowly, quietly, one convenient decision after another. Understanding that does not make what he did acceptable. It only makes it human, and human choices still have consequences. Evelyn asked about him again last Friday. I told her he'd been busy with work, which is what I always say. It's not quite accurate, but it's not cruel. She deserves to love her son without understanding what he did. I can carry that knowledge for both of us. The cardinal still comes to the bird feeder outside her window. I watch it with her sometimes, on the good days. She'll point at it and say something small. Look at that. And I'll look, and for a few seconds we're just 2 people watching a bird. No history, no paperwork, no weight, just that. I'm a lucky man. I still know that.